The year was 1887. In the lawless expanse of the Montana Territory, the Mercer brothers were known for two things: their vast, unforgiving cattle empire and their absolute refusal to settle down. But when a forgotten clause in their father's will threatened to strip them of the Blackwood Ridge Ranch unless they were married by the harvest moon, desperation forced their hand. They sent 4 letters to 4 different matrimonial agencies across the East. They expected strangers. They expected simple contracts. But what stepped off that train changed the history of the territory forever. 4 women, distinctly different, yet hiding a connection that could get them all hanged. This isn't just a romance. It's a story of survival, deception, and the blood that binds us. This is the legend of the Mercer brides. The heat in Blackwood Ridge was enough to blister the paint off a church wall. It was late August, and the dust hung suspended in the air like a heavy curtain over the Mercer Ranch. Garrett Mercer, the eldest at 34, stood on the porch of the main house, staring at the document in his hand as if it were a venomous snake. It was the last will and testament of Jedediah Mercer. Beside him stood their family attorney, a man named Arthur P. Holloway, who looked entirely too comfortable delivering bad news in a wool suit. "Read it again, Arthur," Garrett growled, his voice like gravel grinding together. Arthur pushed his spectacles up his nose. "It is explicitly clear, Garrett. To my 4 sons, I leave the entirety of the Blackwood claim, comprising 4,000 acres and the herd, on the condition that they demonstrate the stability necessary to perpetuate the Mercer legacy. Specifically, each son must be legally wedded and residing with his spouse by the harvest moon of 1887. Failure to comply will result in the deed reverting to the Territory Authority for public auction." The Territory Authority, spat Coulter Mercer, the second brother. He was leaning against the railing, cleaning a fingernail with a Bowie knife. "You mean Governor Thaddeus Vance and his cronies? They've been trying to get their hands on our water rights for a decade." "Precisely," Arthur nodded. "You have 6 weeks." The 4 brothers exchanged looks. They were hard men, carved from the granite of the mountains. Garrett was the leader, stoic, ruthless, and tired. Coulter was the enforcer, quick to anger, suspicious of everyone. Bo, the third brother, was the charmer, a gambler who preferred a saloon to a saddle. And Jesse, the youngest at 22, was the dreamer, quiet, observant, and secretly lonely. "We aren't the marrying kind," Bo said, lighting a cigarette. "Who in God's name would have us out here? The nearest settlement is a day's ride, and the only women there are saloon girls who know us too well to sign a contract." "Then you look further," Garrett said, a plan forming behind his dark eyes. He turned to the lawyer. "Draft the letters. Send them to the agencies in Boston, Chicago, St. Louis, and New York. Spread them out. We don't want people thinking we're starting a harem. We need 4 women, willing to travel immediately, expenses paid. Promise them land shares if they stay 5 years." "Mail order brides?" Jesse asked, his face flushing. "Garrett, that's cold, even for you." "It's business, Jesse," Garrett snapped, though he refused to meet his youngest brother's eyes. "We lose this ranch. We lose everything Pa built. We order them. They come. We marry them. We keep the land." It seemed simple. Cold, calculated, and simple. But as the letters went out via the Pony Express, making their way to the smoky, crowded cities of the East, fate was already twisting the knife. The brothers thought they were casting 4 separate nets into the ocean. They didn't realize that the fish they were about to catch were swimming in the same school. In a cramped tenement basement in Chicago, a woman named Eleanor held up a letter she had intercepted from a pile intended for a matchmaker named Mrs. Gable. She looked at the three women sitting around a flickering candle. "It's Montana," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling but determined. "4 brothers. They need wives immediately." "4?" asked Sarah, the gentle one, clutching a rosary. "But we can't. We don't know them." "We don't have a choice," said Rose, the fiery redhead who was currently bandaging a cut on her arm, a souvenir from the night they had to flee their home. "Not after what happened with the alderman. If we stay in Chicago, we're dead. Or in jail." Alice, the youngest, looked up with wide, terrified eyes. "But we have to pretend we don't know each other. How can we do that?" Eleanor leaned forward, the candlelight casting long shadows over her sharp features. "We have to. If they know we're sisters, they'll know we're running. They'll think it's a scheme. We go as strangers. We arrive as strangers, and we make them fall in love with us, or at least tolerate us, until we are safe. 4 brothers," Rose smirked, though fear lingered in her eyes. "4 of us. It's almost like divine intervention." "Or a curse," Sarah murmured. 3 weeks later, the Great Northern Railway hissed and screeched to a halt at the dusty depot of Bitter Creek, the nearest station to the Mercer Ranch. The platform was crowded with miners, cattle hands, and hawkers, but the Mercer brothers stood apart, a formidable wall of denim, leather, and dusters. They had dressed up, or as much as they ever did. Garrett wore a clean white shirt under his vest. Coulter had shaved his beard. Bo smelled of bay rum, and Jesse was fidgeting with a new hat. "This is a mistake," Coulter muttered, his hand hovering near his hip holster. "We don't know who these women are. They could be thieves, whores, spies for Vance." "Shut up," Garrett ordered. "Train's stopping." The steam cleared, and the conductor placed a step stool down. The brothers held their breath. The first to descend was Eleanor. She had given the name Eleanor Vance to the agency, but here she was introduced as Eleanor Sterling from Boston. She was tall, regal, wearing a navy traveling suit that had seen better days, but was brushed impeccable clean. She looked at Garrett, her eyes cool and assessing. Next was Sarah, who claimed to be Sarah Miller from St. Louis. She wore gray, modest, and quiet. She tripped slightly on the last step, and it was Jesse who instinctively lunged forward to catch her elbow. She looked up at him, startled, and a genuine blush rose in her cheeks. Then came Rose, or Rose O'Hara from New York. She stepped down with a confidence that rattled the planks. Her hair was a shock of red under her bonnet, and she looked at the dusty town, not with fear, but with a challenge. Bo Mercer straightened up. His interest peaked immediately. Finally, Alice Wood, from Chicago, stepped down. She looked terrifyingly young, perhaps only 18, clutching a carpet bag with white-knuckled grip. She looked at Coulter, the most intimidating of the brothers, and seemed to shrink. The 4 women stood on the platform. They did not look at each other. They did not speak to each other. They acted perfectly the part of 4 strangers who had coincidentally shared a train car for the last leg of the journey. Garrett stepped forward, removing his hat. "Ma'am, I'm Garrett Mercer. I assume you are Miss Sterling?" Eleanor nodded stiffly. "I am. You're taller than your letter suggested." "And you are?" Garrett paused, looking for a polite word, sturdier. I survived the journey, Mr. Mercer, she replied coolly. I intend to survive this marriage. The introductions were awkward, filled with the stilted formalisms of people signing their lives away. The group moved toward the 2 wagons the brothers had brought. But as they loaded the luggage, a small incident occurred, one that almost unraveled the entire tapestry of lies in the first 5 minutes. A heavy trunk, handled carelessly by a porter, slipped and crashed toward Alice. Before Coulter could move, Rose, who was supposedly a stranger from New York, instinctively shouted, "Allie, watch out," and shoved the younger girl out of the way with a familiarity that spoke of a lifetime of protection. The trunk slammed into the dirt. Silence fell over the group. Coulter narrowed his eyes, his gaze darting between the fiery redhead and the terrified blonde. "Allie?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You called her Allie. Her name is Alice Wood. You're Rose O'Hara. How do you have a nickname for a woman you just met?" The air grew thin. Eleanor froze near the wagon wheel. Sarah gripped her skirt. Rose didn't flinch. She turned to Coulter, smoothing her dress, her mind racing at a mile a minute. On a 3-day train ride, Mr. Mercer, one tends to drop formalities when heavy furniture is about to crush a companion. We played cards in the dining car. I call her Allie because she reminds me of a cat I once had, scared of its own shadow. She delivered the lie with such dismissive arrogance that Bo laughed out loud. "She's got a mouth on her, Coulter," Bo grinned. "I like her." Coulter didn't laugh. He stared at Rose for a long second, then looked at Alice. "Get in the wagon," he grunted, but the suspicion had been planted. As the wagons rumbled out of town toward the distant purple peaks of the ridge, Eleanor sat beside Garrett, staring straight ahead. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. That was too close. They were entering the lion's den. The Mercer brothers were not simple farmers. They were predators in their own domain. And the sisters had to play the role of prey, all while hiding the fact that they were wolves in sheep's clothing themselves. The journey to the ranch took 4 hours. When the homestead finally came into view, the women gasped. It wasn't a shack. It was a fortress. The main house was a sprawling 2-story log and stone structure, fortified against the elements and, seemingly, against enemies. "Welcome home," Garrett said dryly. "Don't get too comfortable. The wedding is tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Sarah squeaked from the second wagon. "But we hardly know you." "The deadline is in 6 weeks," Garrett said over his shoulder. "But the circuit judge is in town tomorrow. He doesn't come back for 2 months. We marry tomorrow, or the deal is off, and you 4 find your own way back to the cities you came from." It was a bluff, partially. Garrett needed them more than he let on. But he wanted to see who would break. In the back of the wagon, the 4 sisters exchanged a glance that the brothers couldn't see. A micro-expression of panic and resolve. They couldn't go back. They had used the last of their money on the train tickets, and the Pinkerton detectives hired by the Chicago aldermen were surely sniffing around the train stations back east by now. They had to say, "I do," to 4 strangers. As the sun set, casting blood-red streaks across the Montana sky, the group arrived at the ranch. The sisters were shown to a bunkhouse that had been hastily cleaned out for them for this one night of propriety before the wedding. Once the door was bolted shut and the brothers had retreated to the main house, the facade dropped. Alice collapsed onto a cot, sobbing quietly. "I can't do it. That one. The one with the scar. Coulter. He looks like he wants to kill me." "He's just a man," Eleanor hissed, rushing to her side but keeping her voice to a whisper. Listen to me, all of you. We are O'Malley's. We survived the famine, we survived the crossing, and we survived Chicago. We will survive these cowboys. Did you see the way they look at us? Sarah asked, wringing her hands. Like we're cattle they bought at auction. We are cattle to them, Rose said, pacing the small room. But cattle don't have claws. We do. We just have to wait until we are legally wed. Once we are wives, we have rights. We have protection. And if they find out? Alice sniffled. They won't, Eleanor said firmly. We play our parts. I am the stern spinster. Sarah, you are the pious mouse. Rose, you are the firecracker. Keep the charming one, Beau, distracted. And Alice, just stay out of Coulter's way. Outside, in the main house, the brothers were having a very different conversation. They sat around the heavy oak table, a bottle of whiskey between them. I don't buy it, Coulter said, slamming his glass down. That redhead saved the blonde too fast. Reflexes like that don't come from playing cards. You're paranoid, Beau dismissed him, though he looked thoughtful. They're just women, Colt. Desperate ones, clearly, or they wouldn't be here. The oldest one, Garrett mused, staring into the amber liquid in his glass. Eleanor. She walks like she's royalty, but her hands... Did you see her hands? Rough? Jessie asked. Calloused, Garrett corrected. On the fingertips, like a seamstress, or someone who picks locks. You think they're criminals? Jessie asked, horrified. I think, Garrett said, standing up and walking to the window to look out at the bunkhouse where a single light burned, that everyone out here is running from something. The question is, are they running toward us? Or are they just using us to hide? He turned back to his brothers. Keep your guns close tonight. We marry them tomorrow. But nobody sleeps with both eyes closed until we know exactly who these women are. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying the scent of sage and impending rain. The stage was set. 4 marriages, 4 lies, and a past that was racing down the tracks to catch up with them. The morning of the wedding broke with a sky the color of a bruised plum. Thunder grumbled low in the throat of the valley, threatening a storm that wouldn't break. In the small, whitewashed church of Bitter Creek, the air was stifling. Judge Cornelius Thayer, a man with a face like a dried apple and breath that smelled of peppermint and rot-gut whiskey, stood at the altar. He looked impatient. He had a poker game starting at noon at the saloon, and marrying 4 couples was cutting into his leisure time. The church pews were empty save for Arthur Holloway, the lawyer, acting as the witness. The emptiness made the ceremony feel less like a celebration and more like a sentencing hearing. Garrett Mercer stood at the far right, his jaw set so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. Beside him stood Eleanor. She wore the same navy suit she arrived in, having no time or money for a wedding dress. She stood with a spine of steel, staring straight ahead at the wooden cross on the wall. Do you, Garrett Jedediah Mercer, take this woman? I do, Garrett interrupted, his voice flat. And do you, Eleanor Sterling? I do, she said, her voice matching his for lack of emotion. The ceremony moved down the line like a domino effect of reluctance. Beau and Rose were next. Beau looked dashing, having dusted off his best black coat, a rogue's grin plastered on his face. Rose looked furious. She had found a small tear in her skirt that morning and was convinced it was a bad omen. When asked for her vow, she hesitated for a full 3 seconds, long enough for Beau's grin to falter, before snapping, I do. Jessie and Sarah were third. Jessie looked like he was about to be sick. He kept glancing at Sarah, who was trembling so violently that her gray dress vibrated. When Jessie took her hand to place the plain gold band on her finger, he was surprised by the coldness of her skin. "I got you," he whispered, so low only she could hear. "I won't let you fall." Sarah looked up, her eyes swimming with unshed tears, and nodded. Then it was Coulter and Alice. This was the match that sucked the air out of the room. Coulter loomed over the petite blonde. He didn't look like a groom. He looked like a warden. Alice looked like she was waiting for the hangman's drop. "I do," Coulter grunted. Alice's voice cracked. She coughed, panic flaring in her eyes. She looked toward Eleanor, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana," Judge Thayer slapped his book shut, "I pronounce you men and wives. Sign the register, then get out of my church." The signing of the register was where the first crack appeared. The book lay open on a rickety table near the door. Garrett signed with a heavy, flourishing hand. Eleanor signed with precise, sharp strokes. Bo signed with a loop. Rose with a scratch. Jessie and Sarah followed. Then Alice stepped up. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the quill. She dipped it in the inkwell, a drop splashing onto the parchment. Coulter was standing right behind her, his shadow engulfing her. "Sign it," he murmured. Alice would. Alice touched the pen to the paper. Her muscle memory, honed by 18 years of writing her true name, took over. She started to write the letter O. She stopped. The ink began to bleed into the paper, forming a dark blot. "What's that?" Coulter asked, his voice sharp. "You started with an O." The silence in the church was deafening. Rose took a step forward, her hand going to her purse where she kept a small sewing scissor, a pathetic weapon, but the only one she had. Alice froze. Her mind raced. I was going to write O," she stammered, looking up at Coulter with wide, wet eyes. I'm so overwhelmed. I don't know what I'm doing." Coulter stared at the ink blot. He looked at the O. Then he looked at her face. He didn't buy it. Not for a second. But he also saw the genuine terror in her eyes. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't want to crush her in front of his brothers. "Just write your name, Alice," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Don't make a mess of the legal papers." Alice scribbled Alice Wood next to the blot, her signature jagged and ugly. As they walked out into the dusty street, the storm finally broke. Rain began to fall in heavy hot sheets, turning the dust of Bitter Creek into instant mud. "Into the wagons!" Garrett shouted over the thunder. "We're burning daylight." The ride back to Blackwood Ridge was miserable. The women were soaked to the bone. The brothers were silent. The reality of what they had just done was settling in. They were legally bound. The deed to the ranch was safe. But now they had to live with these strangers. That night, the ranch house felt different. The brothers had assigned rooms. Garrett took the master bedroom upstairs. He opened the door for Eleanor, who walked in and surveyed the room. It was masculine, sparse, with a large four-poster bed dominating the space. Garrett closed the door and locked it. Eleanor spun around, her hands raising defensively. "Relax," Garrett said, tossing his wet coat onto a chair. "I'm not an animal." He walked to the wardrobe and pulled out a spare blanket. "You take the bed. I'll take the chaise by the window." Eleanor blinked, her guard faltering slightly. You don't intend to consummate the marriage?" Garrett finished for her. He looked at her with those dark, intelligent eyes. "Miss Sterling, Or Mrs. Mercer, I suppose. We have a business arrangement. I needed a signature to keep my land. You needed... Well, I don't know what you needed, but you clearly needed it bad enough to come to the middle of nowhere. I don't force women. When you're ready to be a wife in full, you tell me. Until then, we sleep separately. He lay down on the chaise, turning his back to her. Eleanor stood frozen for a moment. It was the first act of decency she had experienced from a man in years. It terrified her more than cruelty would have. Cruelty she knew how to handle. Kindness was a trap. Down the hall, Beau and Rose were in a different situation. Beau was sitting on the edge of the bed, pulling off his boots. Rose stood by the door, arms crossed. So, Beau grinned, Rose Mercer has a ring to it. Don't get used to saying it, she snapped. I'm tired. Where do I sleep? In the bed, darling. It's a marriage bed. I'd rather sleep in the barn with the horses. Beau laughed, a rich, warm sound. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a deck of cards. Tell you what, we play for it. 5-card draw. I win, you sleep in the bed with me. You win, I sleep in the hall. Rose looked at the cards. She had spent her childhood watching her father hustle workers on the Chicago docks. She knew how to bottom deal better than she knew how to cook. Deal them, she said, sitting opposite him on the floor. 10 minutes later, a stunned Beau Mercer was gathering his pillow and blanket to sleep in the hallway. He looked at Rose, who was shuffling the deck with one hand, a smirk playing on her lips. You cheated, he accused, but there was admiration in his voice. Prove it, cowboy, she replied, and slammed the door in his face. But in the smallest room at the end of the hall, there was no banter. Coulter stood by the window, watching the rain lash against the glass. Alice sat on the edge of the bed, still in her damp dress, shivering. Get changed, Coulter said without turning around. You'll catch pneumonia, and I don't have time to nurse a sick wife. I don't have my trunk, she whispered. Coulter walked to a chest of drawers, pulled out a flannel shirt, and tossed it to her. It was huge, smelling of gun oil and pine. Wear that. Alice scurried behind a changing screen. Mr. Mercer? Coulter. Coulter. About the signature. Who are you running from, Alice? The question hung in the air, heavy as lead. Alice froze, half-dressed behind the screen. I don't know what you mean, she lied, her voice trembling. You started to write an O, Coulter said, his voice flat. And you flinch every time a door slams. You aren't just a poor girl looking for a husband. You're a rabbit. And rabbits only run when there's a fox. He walked over to the door, checked the lock, and then wedged a heavy wooden chair under the handle. What are you doing? Alice gasped, peeking out from the screen. Securing the perimeter, Coulter said. He pulled his Colt Peacemaker from his holster and placed it on the nightstand. Then he lay down on the floor, directly in front of the door. You take the bed. If anyone comes through that door, they have to go through me first. Alice stared at him. He wasn't keeping her in. He was keeping the world out. For the first time in months, the knot of panic in her chest loosened, just a fraction. 2 weeks passed. The harvest moon came and went, cementing the brothers' claim to the Blackwood Ridge. The frantic energy of the wedding settled into a grueling routine of ranch life. The sisters, now the Mercer wives, were learning that the Wild West was less about adventure and more about relentless, back-breaking labor. Sarah proved to be a natural in the kitchen, her quiet demeanor suited to the long hours of baking and preserving. Jessie often lingered in the kitchen, finding excuses to sharpen knives or repair cupboards just to be near her gentle presence. Rose, to everyone's surprise, had an affinity for the horses. She was fearless. Bo found her one afternoon in the corral, breaking a stubborn Mustang mare. She was dusted in dirt, her hair wild, shouting curses that would make a sailor blush. Bo watched from the fence, a complex look of desire and confusion on his face. She was a puzzle he couldn't solve, and he was becoming addicted to trying. Eleanor, however, made the biggest impact. She took one look at the Mercer Ranch ledgers and nearly fainted. The brothers were excellent cattlemen, but terrible accountants. Within a week, she had reorganized their finances, cut waste by 20%, and negotiated a better price for grain from the town store. Garrett watched her work at his father's desk, the lamplight illuminating her sharp profile. He respected competence above all else, and Eleanor was terrifyingly competent. But the mystery of her past gnawed at him. She was too educated, too refined, and too guarded to be a simple spinster from Boston. But the bubble of relative peace was about to burst. On a Tuesday afternoon, a stranger rode into Bitter Creek. He didn't look like the usual drifters. He wore a city suit, dusted with travel, and a bowler hat. He rode a hired horse and carried himself with the arrogant assurance of a man who had the law, or money, on his side. He tied his horse outside the Golden Nugget Saloon and pushed through the swinging doors. The saloon was quiet. The bartender, a burly man named Gus, was wiping down the bar. "Whiskey," the stranger said, tossing a silver dollar onto the wood. Gus poured. "New in town?" "Just passing through," the man said. He took a sip, grimaced, then reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of parchment. "I'm looking for information. I'm a private inquiry agent. Name's Burke. Elias Burke." Gus eyed the paper. "We don't like inquiry agents. Round here, Mr. Burke." "I'm not looking for trouble." Burke smiled, a cold, reptile expression. "I'm looking for family, a retrieval job. Wealthy father, runaway daughters. You know the story." He unfolded the paper. It wasn't a wanted poster, not officially. It was a sketch, a drawing of 4 young women. The likenesses were rough, but the features were distinct enough. "I'm looking for the O'Malley sisters," Burke said smoothly. "Eleanor, Bridget, Sadie, and Allie. They're wanted for questioning in Chicago regarding the untimely death of a prominent alderman." Gus squinted at the drawing. He didn't know the name O'Malley, but he recognized the faces. Everyone in town did. They were the new Mercer brides. Gus was a gossip, but he was also loyal to the locals over strangers. He shrugged. "Don't look familiar." "Are you sure?" Burke slid another silver dollar across the bar. "They might have changed their names, dyed their hair. The oldest one is sharp. Dangerous." "I said I don't know 'em," Gus grunted. Burke held the bartender's gaze for a long moment, then smiled. "Fair enough." He finished his drink and turned to leave. But as he reached the door, he bumped into a man entering. It was Bo Mercer. "Watch it," Bo muttered, dusting off his sleeve. "My apologies," Burke said, tipping his hat. He paused. He looked at Bo, then his eyes dropped to the distinctive silk scarf tied around Bo's neck. It was a woman's scarf, a scarf with a distinctly Eastern floral pattern, one that Rose had worn on the train. Burke's eyes narrowed. "Fine scarf, sir. A gift from your wife." Bo bristled. He didn't like the way this city slicker was looking at him. "Move along, friend." Burke stepped out into the sunlight, watching Bo walk to the bar. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and scribbled, Blackwood Ridge, Mercer family, one potential lead. Back at the ranch, the atmosphere was shifting. That evening, Eleanor called a meeting in the barn. The brothers were up at the house eating dinner. The sisters gathered in the hayloft, the air thick with the smell of dry grass and manure. We have to be more careful, Eleanor whispered, her face pale. I found a letter in Garrett's desk from the governor. He's challenging the water rights again. If the ranch comes under legal scrutiny, they'll look at us. They'll look at the marriage licenses. We're legally married, Rose argued, picking straw off her skirt. The names we used are aliases, but the ceremony was real. That makes it fraud, Sarah whimpered. That's another crime. The only crime that matters is the one in Chicago, Eleanor snapped. Did anyone check the mail today? I did, Alice said, her voice small. She reached into her apron and pulled out a crumpled newspaper. It's from 2 weeks ago, a St. Louis paper. She handed it to Eleanor. Eleanor unfolded it, and the color drained from her face. Alderman Patrick Clancy found murdered in Chicago home. $5,000 bounty for the capture of the domestic staff, the O'Malley sisters. Murdered? Sarah gasped, clutching her chest. But we just tied him up. We just wanted the money he owed us. He must have had a heart attack, Eleanor whispered, her hands shaking. Or someone else came in after we left and finished the job. $5,000. Rose read over Eleanor's shoulder. That's a fortune. That's enough to make a saint turn sinner. Does it say we killed him? Alice asked, tears streaming down her face. It implies it, Eleanor said grimly. We're not just thieves anymore, girls. We're cop killers. Clancy had friends in the police. Suddenly, the barn door creaked open below them. The sisters froze, blowing out the lantern instantly. Hello! Garrett's voice boomed from the darkness below. Who's up there? Eleanor put a finger to her lips. They held their breath, 4 hearts beating in terrified unison. Probably just rats, they heard Coulter's voice say. Big rats, Garrett muttered. The footsteps receded, and the door closed. Eleanor let out a shaky breath. We have to destroy this paper, and we have to make sure these men never, ever find out who we really are. If they see that bounty, they'll turn us in themselves. They need money for the ranch. $5,000 would solve all their problems. They wouldn't, Sarah said, though she sounded unsure. Jesse wouldn't. They are men, Eleanor said, her voice hard as iron. And men will always choose gold over women. We are alone in this. Remember that. But they weren't alone. The next morning, Bo rode into town to buy supplies. As he loaded sacks of flour into the wagon, he saw the stranger, Burke, standing by the telegraph office. Burke was nailing a poster to the wall. Bo walked over, curiosity getting the better of him. He looked at the poster, at the sketch. He froze. The drawing of the redhead wasn't perfect, but the defiant tilt of the chin, the way the hair curled, it was Rose. There was no mistaking it. And then he saw the words, "Wanted for murder." Bo felt the ground sway beneath him. He looked at Burke, who was watching him with a shark-like grin. "Recognize them?" Burke asked softly. Bo looked at the poster, then at the man. His hand drifted toward his gun belt. He thought of Rose. The way she laughed when she cheated at cards. The way she smelled like wildflowers and horse sweat. Murder? Bo Mercer was a gambler. He knew when to fold and when to bluff. He looked Burke dead in the eye and spat on the ground. Never seen him in my life." He turned and walked away, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had to get home. He had to warn Garrett. Or did he? If Rose was a murderer, was he sleeping next to a monster? Or was she the victim? As he whipped the horses into a gallop back toward the ridge, Bo realized one thing. The game had just changed. The stakes were no longer just the ranch. They were life and death. And the devil was riding right behind him. Bo Mercer rode the last mile to the ranch like the devil was snapping at his horse's heels. The image of the wanted poster was burned into his retinas. Murder. He burst into the barn, his chest heaving. The sun was dipping low, casting long, bloody shadows across the yard. He saw Rose carrying a bucket of water near the trough. She looked up, smiling when she saw him. A genuine smile that hit Bo like a punch to the gut. He didn't return it. He dismounted while the horse was still moving, marched over to her, grabbed her wrist, and dragged her into the tack room, slamming the heavy door behind them. "Bo, you're hurting me," Rose cried, trying to wrench her arm free. He pinned her against the wall, his face inches from hers. "Who is Patrick Clancy?" The color drained from Rose's face so fast she looked like a ghost. The bucket she had been holding clattered to the floor, water soaking the hem of her dress. I don't know who. Don't lie to me," Bo roared, his usual charm replaced by a terrifying intensity. "I saw the poster, Rose. In town. $5,000. Murder. They have a sketch. It's you." Rose slumped against the wood paneling, her defiance crumbling into terror. "We didn't kill him, Bo. I swear on my mother's grave." "Then why are you running? Why the fake names?" "Because nobody listens to Irish tenement girls when a rich politician ends up dead," Rose hissed, tears welling in her green eyes. "He was a monster. He cornered Alice, my little sister. She was cleaning his study. He wouldn't let her leave. I heard her screaming. I ran in. I hit him with a fireplace poker. He fell. He was breathing when we left, Bo. I swear he was breathing. We just wanted to get away before he woke up and sent the police. We didn't know he died until weeks later." Bo stared at her. He looked for the lie. He looked for the deceit he had expected from a mail-order bride. But all he saw was a terrified sister who had protected her kin. "Alice," Bo breathed. "Alice Wood is your sister?" "We're all sisters," Rose whispered, the secret finally bleeding out. "Me, Alice, Sarah, Eleanor. We're the O'Malleys." Bo ran a hand down his face, pacing the small room. "God almighty. Does Garrett know? Does Coulter?" "No, only you." Rose reached out, grabbing his vest. "Please, Bo, if you turn us in, they'll hang us. Alice is just a baby. Sarah wouldn't hurt a fly. Eleanor, she just kept us alive." Bo looked down at her hands, rough, trembling hands clutching him for salvation. He was a gambling man, but this wasn't a game of cards. This was his life, his family's ranch. If the law found out the Mercers were harboring fugitives, the ranch would be seized. "Stay here," he said gruffly. "Don't come out until I say so." "Where are you going?" "To figure out how to keep your pretty neck out of a noose." But fate, as it often does, had a faster horse. Before Bo could even leave the barn, the sound of hooves on gravel echoed outside. Not one horse, two. Bo stepped out of the barn, hand on his gun. It wasn't the sheriff. It was Elias Burke, the bounty hunter. And with him was a deputy marshal from the territory capital, a man named Kellen Reed, known to be on Governor Vance's payroll. Garrett Mercer was already on the porch, a Winchester rifle cradled in his arm. Coulter stood beside him, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Garrett asked, his voice cool and devoid of welcome. "Just passing through, Mr. Mercer," Burke said, sliding off his horse with an oily grace. "My associate and I were hoping for a bit of hospitality. It's a long ride back to town, and the storm clouds are gathering again." Garrett didn't move. "We aren't running a hotel." "No," Burke smiled, "but you are running a newlywed household. I heard congratulations are in order. 4 brides. Quite a windfall." Garrett narrowed his eyes. He sensed the danger radiating off Burke. "We're eating supper. If you're hungry, you can eat in the bunkhouse with the hands." "Oh, we wouldn't want to impose," Burke said, stepping onto the porch. "But surely you'd allow us to pay our respects to the ladies. It's rare to see such imported beauty in these parts." Bo walked up from the barn, his face grim. He caught Garrett's eye and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. "Trouble." "Let them eat, Garrett," Bo called out, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "It's bad luck to turn away travelers." Garrett looked at Bo, confused by the intervention, but nodded. "Come in then." The dinner that followed was a master class in torture. The long table was set. The 4 brothers sat on one side, the 4 strangers on the other. Burke and Reed sat at the ends. Eleanor sat with her back straight, cutting her steak with surgical precision. Sarah was pale, barely touching her food. Alice looked like she was going to vomit. "So," Burke said, chewing slowly, "where exactly are you ladies from again? My memory is terrible." "Boston," Eleanor said instantly. "St. Louis," Sarah whispered. "New York," Rose said, her voice steady, though her leg was shaking under the table. "And Chicago," Alice squeaked. "Chicago," Burke repeated, his eyes fixing on Alice. "Great city. Dangerous, though, especially lately. Heard about that alderman, Patrick Clancy?" The silence that fell over the table was heavy enough to crush bone. "Never heard of him," Coulter grunted, reaching for the bread. "We don't get city papers out here." "A tragedy," Burke continued, his eyes never leaving Alice. "Killed in his own home. By his maids, they say. 4 sisters. Vicious creatures. Thieves. Whores, likely." Alice dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. "Is something wrong, Mrs. Mercer?" Burke asked softly. "She's delicate," Coulter snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "And I don't like talk of whores at my dinner table. Eat your food or get out." Burke chuckled, raising his hands in mock surrender. "My apologies. I'm just a man of the law. I see guilt everywhere." Eleanor set her knife down. She turned her icy blue gaze on Burke. "You seem to be a man who enjoys the sound of his own voice, Mr. Burke. Perhaps you should focus on your meal. The road is dark, and accidents happen to men who ask too many questions in the wrong places." Garrett looked at his wife. He had never heard her speak with such menace. It was attractive and terrifying. After dinner, Burke and Reed rose to leave. They hadn't made an arrest. They were scouting. They wanted to see if the women would run. "Thank you for the meal," Burke said, putting on his hat. He looked at Garrett. "You have a lovely family, Mr. Mercer. It would be a shame if something were to break it apart." As they rode away into the darkness, the tension in the room snapped. Garrett turned to the table. "Who is he? And don't tell me he's just a traveler. That man was hunting." No one spoke. "Eleanor," Garrett said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Why was he baiting you?" Eleanor stood up. She looked at her sisters. Sarah was weeping. Alice was shaking. Rose looked ready to fight. "He is a bounty hunter," Eleanor said clearly, "and he is looking for us. Garrett stared at her. Us? We are the O'Malley sisters, Eleanor confessed, and we are wanted for murder. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Jessie gasped, looking at Sarah. Sarah, you killed a man. No, Sarah cried, reaching for him, but Jessie took a step back, horror in his eyes. Coulter stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floorboards. He looked at Alice. The O signature? The fear. It all made sense. You lied. Everything was a lie. The names, the histories. We had to, Alice sobbed. Quiet, Garrett roared. The sound silenced the room. He walked over to Eleanor, towering over her. You signed a legal contract with me. You put my ranch, my father's legacy, at risk. If you are wanted felons, the marriage is void. The land goes to the state, to Vance. We didn't know about the land clause when we came, Eleanor argued, holding her ground. We were just trying to survive. By bringing a noose to my doorstep, Garrett shouted. You used us. You hid behind our name. And you used us, Rose yelled, stepping between Garrett and Eleanor. You didn't want wives. You wanted placeholders. You wanted warm bodies to sign a deed. Don't act like you're innocent, Garrett Mercer. We're all using each other. I should turn you in myself, Garrett hissed. Collect the bounty and use it to buy the land back. You wouldn't, Bo said from the doorway. He hadn't moved since the confession started. Garrett whipped around. You knew. I figured it out today, Bo said calmly. And I didn't say anything. Because Rose is right. Clancy was a monster. They defended themselves. It wasn't murder. It was justice. The law doesn't care about justice, Garrett yelled. The law cares about paper. And on paper, we are harboring fugitives. So what are we going to do, Garrett? Coulter asked, his voice low. He was looking at Alice, who was curled in a ball on the rug. Throw them to the wolves? Let Burke hang that girl? Garrett looked at his brothers. He looked at the women. He was a man of logic, but his logic was failing him. Before he could answer, the window in the parlor shattered. A glass bottle filled with kerosene and a burning rag crashed onto the rug. Fire! Jessie screamed. Flames erupted instantly, licking up the dry curtains. They're not waiting for morning, Garrett shouted. Get down! Another bottle crashed through the kitchen window. Gunshots erupted from the darkness outside, pinging off the stone walls of the house. Burke hadn't left. He had signaled for backup. He didn't just want the women. He wanted to burn them out so he could drag their bodies back to Chicago and claim the reward without a trial. Get the women to the cellar, Garrett barked, his soldier instincts taking over. Coulter, get the rifles. Bo, cover the back door. I'm not going to the cellar, Rose shouted, grabbing a shotgun from the mantel. I'm not dying in a hole. Do as you're told, Garrett yelled, but Rose was already moving to the window, blasting around into the dark. The house was filling with smoke. The fire in the parlor was spreading fast. Coulter grabbed Alice. She was frozen in terror. Move, Allie, he roared. He scooped her up in his arms, shielding her body with his own as he ran toward the kitchen. A bullet shattered a plate inches from his head. They're surrounding us, Bo yelled from the back. There's at least 10 of them. Burke must have hired every drifter in Bitter Creek. Garrett grabbed Eleanor by the arm. The root cellar door is outside, round the back. We have to make a run for it. The house is a tinderbox. My ledgers, Eleanor cried, trying to pull away toward the study. Forget the damn ledgers, Garrett yelled. Move! They burst out the back door into the chaotic night. The barn was already ablaze, the horses screaming in panic. The horses! Rose screamed. Bo, the horses! Bo didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the burning barn. Bo, no! Rose shrieked, chasing after him. Cover them! Garrett ordered Jesse and Coulter. The brothers opened fire into the tree line, suppressing the attackers for a few precious seconds. Coulter fired his Winchester with mechanical precision, his face a mask of rage. He wasn't just defending land anymore. He was defending the terrified girl clinging to his belt. Inside the burning barn, the heat was unbearable. Bo struggled to open the stall doors. The smoke was blinding. He got the first 2 stalls open, slapping the horses to get them to run. He reached the 3rd stall, Rose's favorite mare. The horse was thrashing. Bo fumbled with the latch. A burning beam from the roof groaned and gave way. Bo! Rose appeared in the smoke, her face wrapped in her shawl. She grabbed the latch and yanked it open. The mare bolted, knocking Bo into the hay. The beam crashed down, blocking the exit. Rose! Bo coughed, scrambling up. They were trapped. The fire was roaring like a living thing, consuming the oxygen. Outside, Garrett saw the barn roof collapse inward. No! Jesse screamed. But back at the house, Burke stepped out from the shadows of the trees, a repeater rifle in his hand. He wasn't looking at the barn. He was aiming at Garrett. Give them up, Mercer, Burke shouted over the roar of the fire. Send out the O'Malleys, and we let the rest of you live. Garrett looked at the burning barn where his brother and wife were trapped. He looked at Coulter and Jesse, pinned down behind the water trough. He looked at Eleanor, her face smudged with soot, holding a pistol she clearly didn't know how to use. Garrett Mercer made a choice. He stepped out from cover, dropping his rifle. Garrett, what are you doing? Eleanor screamed. Garrett walked into the open yard, his hands raised. Hold your fire, Burke. Burke signaled his men to stop. Smart man, send them out. I can't, Garrett said, walking closer, his eyes locked on Burke. And why is that? Because, Garrett said, his voice carrying over the crackling flames, Mercers don't trade family for safety. Garrett's hand moved with a speed that defied his size. He drew the revolver from his hip holster, a move he hadn't used since the range wars. Bang, bang, 2 shots. Burke looked down at his chest. 2 red blossoms appeared on his white shirt. He looked up at Garrett, shock written on his face, before he crumpled to the dust. Kill them all! Reed, the deputy, screamed from the trees. The gunfire erupted again, louder than before. But now, the Mercers had nothing to lose. From the burning barn, a wagon burst through the flaming doors. Bo was driving, whipping the horses, with Rose in the back firing the shotgun. They crashed through the burning debris, circling around to flank the attackers. Get to the ridge, Garrett yelled, grabbing Eleanor. We have the high ground. They retreated up the rocky slope behind the house, leaving their burning home behind. They took cover behind the granite boulders of Blackwood Ridge. Below them, the house and barn burned. The attackers, leaderless with Burke dead, hesitated. The Mercers huddled in the dark rocks. They were alive, but they had lost everything. The ranch house was gone. The deed was likely burned, and they were now outlaws, huddled with their outlaw wives. Coulter sat with his back against a rock, holding Alice. She was shivering violently. It's okay, Coulter whispered, brushing soot from her hair. I've got you. We ruined everything, Alice wept. We burned your home. Garrett looked down at the inferno. He looked at Eleanor. She wasn't crying. She was reloading her pistol. We didn't lose the land, Eleanor said, her voice hard. The deed is filed at the courthouse. The house is just wood and stone. We can rebuild. We can't rebuild if we're in jail, Jesse pointed out, bandaging a graze on his arm. Burke is dead, Garrett said grimly, but Reed got away. He'll bring the governor. He'll bring the cavalry. Then let them come, Rose said, spitting blood from a split lip. She looked at Bo, who was breathing hard beside her. We're done running. Garrett looked at his brothers. He looked at the four women. They were a mess, soot-stained, bleeding, terrified. But they were together. We aren't Mercers and O'Malleys anymore, Garrett said. We're the Blackwood Gang now, and nobody takes this mountain from us. The siege ended not in a shootout, but with a gamble. Realizing they couldn't survive the brutal winter on the ridge, Garrett surrendered to the marshals on one condition: a public trial in Helena. The courtroom was packed. Prosecutor Horace Blackwood, a hired gun for the governor, painted the sisters as black widows who had seduced the Mercers to hide a cold-blooded murder in Chicago. The jury, 12 grim-faced miners, looked ready to hang them. But Arthur Holloway, the Mercers' lawyer, played his ace. The courtroom doors swung open to reveal a surprise witness: Margaret Clancy, the widow of the man the sisters supposedly killed. A hush fell over the gallery. Margaret, scarred and weary, testified that her husband hadn't died from Rose's blow. She revealed the suppressed coroner's report. Alderman Clancy, drunk and furious, had fallen down the stairs after the girls fled. His death was an accident, not murder. The fraud charges crumbled, and since they weren't fugitives, Garrett's killing of the bounty hunter Burke was ruled clear-cut self-defense. The jury took less than 10 minutes. Not guilty. The governor stormed out, his plan to seize the water rights shattered. In the chaos of the cheering crowd, Garrett pulled Eleanor close, kissing her for the first time without a contract between them. They returned to Blackwood Ridge as winter thawed. They rebuilt the ranch from stone, making it stronger than before. Bo and Rose raised prize-winning horses. Jesse and Sarah filled the house with children. Coulter and Alice turned the scorched earth into a blooming garden. The Mercer brothers had sent away for brides to save a deed, but they ended up fighting a war to keep the only thing that truly mattered: each other. And that is the legend of the Mercer brides. From a desperate mail-order scheme to a courtroom showdown that brought down a governor, the brothers found that the biggest risks yield the greatest rewards. They wanted to save their land, but they ended up saving 4 women who, in turn, saved their souls. If you enjoyed this Wild West saga, please smash that like button. Let's aim for 5,000 likes for the O'Malley sisters. Subscribe so you don't miss next week's story: a Victorian mystery set in a haunted lighthouse. Thanks for watching.